Hello and welcome to the Title Pending Podcast, episode 4. I am your host this and every week. My name is Willow, and let's get started. Hopefully this is one of the last weeks that I have an amateur setup. I am investing in some software and some, recording techniques and devices and an iPad. So, we're getting somewhere. Slowly but surely, guys. Maybe one day you'll be able to see my face. You all know what I look like. Maybe you're okay with this. This week is going to be a little more lighthearted than the last few have been. I have never been so out of body for a show in my life. My favorite show, for those of you who don't know, is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But that is not what this episode is about. This episode is about Season 3 of Stranger Things. So if you haven't watched the season and plan to watch the season, and you're a big enough fan that spoilers bother you, please don't listen to this episode until you finish Season 3 of Stranger Things. And if you don't care about Stranger Things, or, this season, or, just don't want to listen to this, that's totally fine. I'll see you next week. But this is what I want to talk about, and I have never been so full of emotions in my life. So for those of you who, have been in the dark, live under a rock, Season 3 of Stranger Things came out on July 4th, and I literally just finished it 10 minutes ago. So, it's only been a few days, so I totally understand if you haven't finished yet, because some of us have lives. Usually I finish a season the day it comes out, but I have 2 jobs, so I wasn't able to finish it until this day. But, a lot of you, take even longer, and that's totally valid and totally fine. It means you have a life. It means you have other things to do. So don't listen to this if you haven't finished the season. I said that already, but before I get into it, I don't want to spoil anything for you, and I don't want it to be my fault if you decide to listen to this podcast and have things spoiled for you. So here's my warning. Please, take it as you will, whether you take it at all or not. But let's jump right into it. So I wish I had someone to talk with this week, because some of my friends have also finished the season, but it'll have to do with me just talking to the air. And a lot of you who follow me on Instagram, I just posted a story about it, but this is going to go into more detail because, I love talking about television and media in general. And this is one of the most well-done modern shows, I think, in recent times. Especially one that incorporates fantasy and, sci-fi into it, as well as, still making it interesting and still making it, funny and making the characters likable and well-rounded. There's a lot that goes into this season, and I want to do as much talking about it as possible. I know I'm kind of beating around the bush because I don't even know where I should start. So let's start from the beginning. Stranger Things began a few years ago when they found Eleven, who was being experimented on by what I gather is the Russian government. She was pretty much put into a lab and experimented on and studied and abused because of her powers. And she escaped somehow. I don't remember how, to be honest. They killed the guy in the diner, which I'm still pissed about. And, fast forward to this season, she is living with Jim Hopper, who I will get to later. And, he's pretty much her dad, her father figure. She's dating Mike. She's friends with all these kids that, have the worst fucking luck. And, everything's good and dandy. For the most part. I mean, besides the whole Demogorgon and scary Russian government and scary Russian weapons and, just the overall doom of Hawkins, Indiana. But this season basically brings us back to Will's experience with this thing that I will refer to as thing, slimy thing, monster, Demogorgon, gross, in the coming sentences. But Will was pretty much possessed by this thing and then made to be its, like, puppet, pretty much. Turns out that thing in the 3rd season is after 11, and the goal is to kill her. The goal of this giant, slimy Russian monster is to kill a 15-year-old girl. Sounds good. You know, yes, she does have powers, and yes, they could be put to use, in the wrong way if they get into the wrong hands. But I really don't understand why a giant, slimy weapon is the way to go about that. Why can't you just... I mean, like, there's probably more to it. I know that the next season that they're making next year, or the year after, or whatever, is supposed to be the last one, so I'm hoping for some answers to these questions. But let's talk about the season in general, shall we? Billy, for those of you who don't know, Billy and Max are new in the 2nd season, so if you haven't seen the 2nd season, this might not make sense to you. Max and Billy moved from California to Hawkins, Indiana. First of all, why? Why did they do that? They really didn't need to do that. And Max became friends with the kids, and Billy became a piece of shit. I don't know if he was a piece of shit in California, but he was a piece of shit in Indiana. He was horrible. The worst. The most irredeemable character I've ever seen in my life. Racist, abusive, definitely on steroids, and just overall very unlikable. Super hot. Would be hotter without a mullet, but super hot. But that's about it. And you know, this season, he was a tool of the monster. Which, you know, I was waiting for a redemption arc this entire season, and I didn't get one. And this is where the spoilers come in. So basically what I gather from this season is that everybody's growing up. 11 and Mike are a couple. They make out a lot. Hopper hates it. Lucas and Max are like on and off all summer, but they're still together. Dustin went away to science camp and met a girl named Susie, who no one thought was real for most of the season. And then there's Will, who just wants to play D&D. Please play D&D with Will. He deserves it. I know that he's, like, clinging to his childhood, and I think that's a big, big part of the season that a lot of people look over. Will didn't get to have a childhood. Will was possessed by a demon, monster, gross, slimy thing, for the majority of, like, his peak kid years, when he's allowed to, like, not have responsibility and not really be an adult. Like, he doesn't really have to worry about anything because he's 12. And he had to worry about dying. And I just feel as though that was kind of glossed over in the season. That he, like, didn't really get to have childhood. So he's not really ready to move on. And he still wants to be a kid and play D&D and, you know, still wears the costumes and still, like, creates these stories. He's still at a clubhouse up until he destroyed it. Like, he didn't get to be a kid because he was a tool. He was a weapon. He didn't really get to enjoy his life. And he's not ready to move on, and everybody else has already moved on because they weren't experiencing the same things. Yes, they had to deal with it, but they weren't, like, firsthand, like, they weren't puppets of this thing. Like, they remember their childhoods, you know? They remember being kids, and Will doesn't get to because he wasn't there. So when he finally gets a chance to, and he's still connected to this demon somehow, by the way, but, like, first of all, Will's story is completely glossed over, and I feel as though that's really shitty because he was the main character in the first season. He was the reason that this show went the way it did. And I feel as though the writers kind of ignored him this season. He wasn't really that valuable, as opposed to 11 being the main character of the season, I think. Will touches his neck a lot this season, and that's it. He doesn't really get much else. Like, he's still valuable, he's still important, but we don't get to see his full mental breakdown of not being able to be a kid and not being able to enjoy himself and not being able to play D&D. Will Byers, I am free next Thursday. If you want to play D&D, please give me a call. I am so sorry that your friends won't play D&D with you. But, everybody else got to move on, and he didn't, and he's kind of stuck, and we see that briefly. There's also implication that Will Byers is gay, and I support that with every fiber of me being. There's a scene where Will is freaking out, and he's like, I didn't get to do this, I didn't get to be a kid, you guys are all moving on, I just want to, play D&D, and then Mike tries to explain to him, well, we're all growing up, we're all, we've done that, we've been there, we got to be kids, you don't even like girls, and then there's, this whole silence, and I'm like, oh, you don't like girls because you like boys, and I can speculate about that, because that's pretty much the age where you get to discover whether or not girls are for you, and yes, there's that whole, I didn't get to be a kid thing, I'm not ready to focus on relationships, but, make Will Byers gay. That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking. That's all I want. But we're moving on. So Will didn't really get to be a kid. 11 didn't really get to have a family. And she finally gets a family. And then her family is killed. Her family dies. Spoiler alert. The last episode that I just finished, Hopper dies. I have a theory he's still alive. Because we don't see his body. We don't see him dead. And I know that a lot of people who have seen this and are probably thinking, he was obliterated. We saw what happened to the Russians. Same thing happened to him. He was too close to the machine. It blew up. He died. Bullshit. They killed 11 for 2 seconds. They would do the same for her dad. The fact that he calls himself her dad, by the way. Ow. Fucking ow. But, okay, I'm so sorry that I'm, super into this. This is probably going to be a short podcast because I'm talking really fast. But Hopper really, really cared about 11 more than anybody I've ever seen. Mike included. Although Mike said, I love you, and it's so soft and so cute. And, I love it so much. But Hopper lost his daughter. And really, it took him a lot, but it took him, and it took him a lot of time, but he bonded with 11 in a way that I don't think anybody else did, in a way that, he saw her as a person more than just someone with superpowers. He saw her as his kid, which, looking at his past and how he lost his daughter, would probably be really hard for him to accept someone else into his life like that. And he did it. And he took care of her. And he, implicated rules. Because a lot of people who go through that aren't able to discipline their kids because they love them so much, and they're like, I don't want to lose them that way, so I'm just going to let them do whatever they want. But, he was still able to implicate the 3-inch rule and still cared about 11 enough to let her see Mike and be in their room alone. He was perfect. And they killed him. Because, we have to feel something somehow, and last season they killed fucking Bobby, which I am still very upset about. He made a huge impact in such a short amount of time, even though I didn't trust him at first. I don't think we were supposed to. But Hopper is a character that I have always resonated with, because he's a hard ass, but he cares, and that matters to me, and I love that. And he's such a well-rounded character. We have a backstory for him. He's in love with Joyce. Also, Joyce finally asks him out on a date, and then she loses him. That doesn't make any sense, considering we lost Bobby last season, and Joyce had to go through that last season, and she has to go through that again. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if that's just me being hopeful that he'll come back in the final season, but I don't see a way that he's gone completely. I don't see it as, a final definite thing, because we didn't see his body. We didn't see Barb's body, and then we saw Barb's body, and it wasn't Barb, and it was weird, and I don't really care about that. I care about Jim. I care about Jim Hopper. And I feel like enough people care about Jim Hopper that there's no way that was his final. There was no way. He died a hero, if he died, but I don't think he's dead. And I think that next season is going to be centered around that, and I'm really excited for it. Anyway, this season in general is a lot to watch with clean eyes, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. You need to understand the way that the show works in not a deeper way, but like a more thorough way, because there's a lot going on in this season. Like, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of just things that you miss if you don't pay attention, and a lot of references to like other things, and it's incredible. It's such a good show. If you haven't seen Stranger Things, first of all, why are you listening to this podcast? Second of all, please watch Stranger Things. I probably should have said that before I told everybody to leave, but watch Stranger Things, or watch it again if you already watched it. And if you want to have a discussion about it, please feel free to talk to me, because I need to talk about it. But I think Will not getting his childhood was glossed over and needs to be readdressed in a different way. In a way that, like, centers on him and focuses on the fact that, you know, he needs to have that break. He needs to realize, I didn't get to be a kid. And that, you know, he needs to go through the 5 stages of grief of, like, not being able to be himself. And then a whole separate category that I really want to talk about is Steve and Robin. I love Robin, by the way. If she's not in next season, I'm not watching it. She's incredible. For those of you who don't know, Maya Hawke is the child, I guess, of Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke, which is wild to me. But she is fucking incredible in this role. She's absolutely insane. She's so funny. And she's gay. We finally have some lesbian representation in this show, and I'm so excited to see where the next season is gonna take her, and if she's gonna be important, she better be important. Also, the fact that Steve liked her, found out she was gay, and then didn't freak out, peak nice guy. Peak nice guy. Love that. I'm so excited about that. Steve has developed so much since the first season. I hated him with every fiber of my being in the first season. I thought he was attractive, like Billy was, but he was a piece of shit. I was rooting for Jonathan. I don't like Jonathan too much anymore, but Steve has come such a long way, and the fact that he's best friends with Dustin is my favorite thing in the world. Basically, he deserves better than he's gotten, and every single season he gets the shit kicked out of him, and I feel as though he needs some sort of resolution there. He needs to kick the shit out of someone. He needs to win one fight, one physical fight with something or someone, because he, every single season, finishes with, like, a black eye or a busted lip or just blood everywhere, and he just, you know, he deserves better. Steve Harrington, I love you, and you deserve the world, and I will give it to you if I can. But Robin is just so smart and so funny and just such a good character overall. I feel as though she needs more of a storyline. I want to know more about her, besides the fact that she is gay, you know? And that wasn't her whole character. We didn't find out until the second to last episode that she liked girls. We didn't know. There was this whole implication that she and Steve were going to get together. And that didn't happen, obviously, because she's a lesbian. But, you know, that wasn't her character. But I want it to be incorporated more. But I also don't care if it's, like, I care if it's not mentioned again, because then that's just a cop-out for representation. It needs to be important. But I want more outside of that as well. I want to know about her family. I want to know if she has siblings. I want to know why she knows Russian. Why she stuck it out with them. Why she cared about them so much. Like, you know, I want her to be a character. You know, I want her to be well-rounded. And I feel as though they could do that. They definitely could do that in the next season. I also heard that this was going to be the last season coming up, the next one that they make, which kind of sucks, but at the same time, I appreciate them knowing when to stop and knowing that if they kept going and kept writing things, unless they have, like, substantial ideas to write, that it would end up being, you know, a cheat and not good. So, I appreciate them, like, already knowing when it's time for something to come to an end. Basically, this show is fantastic, and I do want people to watch it. And I'm stressed. You know? I'm stressed. because it's a show that a lot of people are turned off by because it's popular and because it involves fantasy things, and that's nerdy or something. Like, I don't really like Stranger Things, you know? It's overhyped. It is overhyped in a way that, like, a lot of people really do like it, but it's for good reason. And I'm not going to preach that this show is the best show ever and, like, any other show is just not comparable, because that's not true. But it is definitely, like, an original idea. It's something newer than what we're used to from Netflix and, like, what we're used to from just shows now in general. Like, the fantasy aspect is usually really bad. If you watch a single fantasy show on the CW, you know what I'm talking about. But Netflix did a really good job of making it a likable show and making the characters likable outside of being nerds and outside of this whole thing that they have to go through. We still worry about their personal problems, their relationships, their families, their personalities, what they like. They're still likable characters. And I really appreciate that because, you know, it's hard to watch a show where you don't really care about the characters or the plot. Like, no one watches it. Like, when I watched The Vampire Diaries, they were such unlikable characters, and I was just yelling at the TV screen the whole time. And, like, yeah, that was fun, but, like, I didn't really care what happened to Elena or Stefan or Damon or anybody except for Caroline, to be honest with you, because they were so unlikable and because their storylines were so underdeveloped outside of the main plot. Like, I didn't know anything about anybody. I didn't know anybody's family except for Elena's. And, like, we didn't really get more of that. And there was also no comic relief in that show. I don't know why I'm comparing Stranger Things to The Vampire Diaries right now. That was the first fantasy show that came to my mind. Another fantasy show that does a really good job of making the characters, though, is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Please watch it. It's on Hulu. It's also, 20-something years old. So if you haven't seen an episode of Buffy by now, you're living under a rock. Anyway, fantasy does a really bad job most of the time, especially in recent years, of developing characters and developing a plot that's followable and likable and still interesting. And Stranger Things was able to do that. Stranger Things brought together likable characters and, like, a weird fantasy storyline and made it work somehow. And I appreciate that. And I really appreciate that the main characters are younger and, like, kids. It just makes it that much harder not to root for them. Because they're kids. Like, there's no wrong that they have done to deserve this yet. There was no greater power of, like, these are chosen adults that deserve this turmoil because they're special. Yes, 11 has superpowers, but, like, the rest of them, like, why was Will chosen? Like, it's a way to show that it doesn't really discriminate and that kids can be, the focus point of a show like this, and it can still be good. And I really appreciate that, because having these adult people walk around and being like, oh, she's the chosen one, he's the chosen one, fucking why? They're 20 years old. All they do is drink and party and cry. Like, I don't get it. But these kids are just, they're kids. They're just like, I just want to play D&D. I want to kiss my girlfriend. I want to eat candy and ice cream and fucking not have to fight this Russian weapon that is made out of dead people. Like, it's not worth it. And yet, they're able to be, smart enough. Like, they're all fucking geniuses. And they're smart enough to handle it, and they're smart enough to, just take it in stride, and I just admire them as characters. They're just well written. And this has gone in such a nerdy tangent, and I'm so sorry. But all I want to say, to end this 20-minute discussion I've had with myself, pretty much, is that Stranger Things is an incredible show, and it tackles a lot of things that are really badly done otherwise in TV. With fantasy, with sci-fi, with having kids as the main characters, with doing it set in a different decade. Having it set in the 80s, by the way, is fucking awesome. I love that. I don't know why they did that. I don't know why they chose to do that. But it's awesome, and they did an incredible job on it. And the fact that it's fantasy, they could use the excuse, oh, that didn't exist until 1991. Well, Now it did, because it's a fantasy show. And technology is whatever you want it to be in a fantasy show. Or a sci-fi show. It doesn't have to make sense. But it still makes enough sense that, like, it's not distracting. Like, they still use walkie-talkies because it's the 80s. They don't have iPhones because it's the 80s. But it's also super stressful because they don't fucking communicate with each other. Because they don't know how to do that. If they would have just communicated in the first 4 episodes, this probably would have gone a lot better and taken a lot less time than it did. But obviously they wouldn't have a season if that were the case. So I understand. But if they would just fucking communicate with each other, or if the adults would talk to their kids, or if Steve and Robin decided to, I don't know, contact Mike, Will, Eleven, and Lucas at some point, that they had Dustin with them, I don't know. But I also really appreciate the fact that they made Lucas's sister more of a character. I like her a lot. She's sassy, she's a bitch, and she's fucking fantastic, and I hope she's in next season as an important character, as an part of the main group. But that's all I have to say on this fucking ridiculous show that I just watched. I know a lot of you probably have seen it, and I appreciate those who are listening to this podcast more than anything, because sometimes this shit can be boring. Especially if you haven't seen it. So if you haven't seen it, hopefully you didn't listen to this episode, but if you did listen to this episode and you haven't seen it, I'm sorry that it didn't make sense and it wasn't really targeted at you, but I'll see you next week. Yeah, thank you to all my patrons. I'm gonna go grab my list right now. Give me 2 seconds. And once again, I would like to thank Haley Park, IDK, LOLZ, Willow's mom, Taylor Marshall, Caitlin St. Louis, Sophia, Tina, Shelby Church, Emily Buchanan, Amanda Satterfield, Kat, Holly Rapkin, Mary Cabral, Molly, and Gina. Thank you so much for donating. I will see you next week. Hopefully with one that is more targeted at all of you. But if you have any other TV shows that you want me to do something like this on, please let me know. Because, you know, I find this really fun. I love TV. I love media. This is the reason I'm doing this. But if you haven't seen Season 3 of Stranger Things, please watch Season 3 of Stranger Things. Or if you haven't seen any of Stranger Things, I'm really sorry. Why did you listen to this podcast? Try to watch the first few seasons anyway, I guess? Or don't. I already told you that if you haven't seen it, not to listen to this podcast, so I don't know what to tell you at this point. Have a good week. I'll see you next week. Bye.